and
A small group.
yeah, so far. But either way, we'll record it and we'll be good for. Uh,
We got people joining in.
yep, yep. Good, 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 good. Hey guys, while we're waiting for whoever else might make us, what questions do you have starting on this topic of
Uh,
getting a rotating curriculum to work well?
Good, good morning, Master Oliver. I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
We moved from the progressive style of belt testing that we used to have to a rotating curriculum about a year ago.
Yeah.
And it worked well to a point, but the problem that I have been having is consistency within the instructors to teach the same thing. Does that make any sense?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. My instructors are confused.
Your problem is getting the instructors to follow your plan. Is that what you are saying?
Yeah, perhaps. Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, it sounds like that's a matter of defining what it is you want them to teach and training, and sometimes it's a matter of having assholes who are not with the program teaching for you. So it can go both ways. I tend to attribute it first and foremost to clearly defining what the lesson plan is. And I don't mean it has to be every 5 minutes, but if you don't
Yeah, that's
very
what we
clearly
need.
define,
Yeah.
yeah, if you don't very clearly define what we're doing this week, right? Here are the subjects that we're teaching at beginner. Here's the subjects we're teaching at intermediate, or here's the rotating curriculum that we're teaching. Here's the black belt curriculum we're
I
teaching.
guess to what level you break it down, I don't know. How that's kind of what I want to learn. Yeah, what I need to know.
Well,
How to do it good, how to do it right.
I think there's an argument to be made on both extremes, and somewhere in the middle. And jump in here, Master Smith, at any time. If you were to take, say, Master Moody's approach, Master Moody's approach would be more like, here's the notebook, and you do this for 5 minutes, you do this for 10 minutes, you do this for 10 minutes, you do this for 10 minutes, and have a very, very clearly defined, here's the notebook, here's what we're doing today, and I go do that, right? The other end of the extreme is, kind of what a lot of MMA schools do. You have 22 instructors, and they all kind of come in and teach whatever they want to teach. That extreme is ludicrous and anarchy. I always tended to be, depending upon what rank level it was, somewhere closer to what I just described as Master Moody's approach, but not nearly as defined by the minute. In other words, an intermediate class would have a format that everybody is trained on. Here's what we do to begin with. Here's a 15-minute chunk, 15-minute chunk, 15-minute chunk, or 10-minute chunk, 10-minute chunk. You'd have a head instructor who's in charge of either running the full class themselves or having it potted out with with support people, who is going to be in charge of, we got 9 minutes on this, go, and then on to the next thing, right?
Can I simplify it for you, Master Oliver?
Yeah, go right ahead.
And Sebastian, what you have to remember is that your curriculum number one, and Ron, just to get you up to speed, he's saying he's doing the rotating curriculum, but his instructors have just been kind of teaching whatever they want, and they haven't really been focusing on what he wanted them to do. And so we're talking about making
no, Master Smith. That's not what it's not how it went down. My instructors is that we are just confused in to what level we have to break down the lesson plans.
Okay. Okay.
So it's not. That's kind of what
I'll make it simple then. I'll make it simple. It is every level, because every level we want to have. We have what the block. See, we call it our testing cycle a block. And during the year, we test every 2 months. So we have 6 blocks at every belt level, except the black belt. And at the very end, the conditional and, prep cycle stuff. But basically up to brown belt, everything is on a 2-month block. And in that block is 8 weeks. And in those 8 weeks, we put down what we want to cover in week 1, what we want to cover in week 2, week 3, etc., all the way through where you get to week 7 and 8, which is the testing week. And then it's going to be an overview of everything you did. So if I take my curriculum, it might be that in that, so let's say there's 6 weeks that we're actually teaching material that might be new material, but in reality, you would probably have all the curriculum covered in three weeks. So week 1, week 2, week 3. And you have to remember, one day you can't teach one thing and another day teach a different thing because not everybody comes the same day. So that week, that whole week, you have to cover the same thing. Next week, you're covering something different, but you're reviewing maybe what they did last week. And then the third week, you cover something new, but you still review the second and third a little bit. And then 4th, 5th, and 6th, we just repeat 1, 2, and 3. So that way, if they didn't get it down well enough in that first week or second week or third week, then they're going to get it again in the 4th, 5th, and 6th. And then 7th and 8th is used for testing and refocusing on a few things that you might see need a little more help. You follow me?
Yeah. Well,
So all you have to do is take your curriculum for that 2 months, divide it into 3 sections, and in week 1, teach a third of it, week 2, a third, and week 3, a third. 4, 5, and 6, you're just going to repeat those.
yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that's getting specific enough because
Yes, sir. We're not too far from that. Thank you,
Yeah.
Master. Okay.
but if I'm not mistaken, the question really comes down to the Tuesday at 6:15 class. Is there an outline that the instructor is expected to follow, or is there flexibility in what they do within that structure? Is that what the question was?
Yeah, yes, sir. So
Yeah.
the answer is yes, to that level. We
Right.
have an outline and a guide plan for what we should teach. And we think we're getting all in the same page. I just want to make sure that I'm doing it right, too. So yeah.
You know, in my estimation, you take what Master Smith said and you very clearly define what it is we're expected to accomplish at each level in this current week. We typically had it then broken down into, say, A day, B day. A day we might be working on forms, for instance, this week, and B day we might be working on sparring combinations or sparring drills or something. But then we would divide out the week so that when they came twice this week, they were likely to get some different piece of the curriculum. Does that make sense? And then within that, I think it ultimately depends upon, you know, how much control you want to exercise over the instructors and how advanced they are, right? If I wanted to, you know, get to the engineering extreme, I could have 365 days outlined specifically. I sit down in a vacuum and I write out, here's 10 minutes, here's 5 minutes, here's 10 minutes, here's 10 minutes. In practical terms, I've never felt that that's where solving the problem lied. I always felt that the solving the problem lied on me overtraining the staff dramatically and beating them all, to excuse the term, but beating them all into submission so there was such a strong common culture so that they were all going to accomplish the same thing with a general outline rather than everything scripted for them. Does that make sense? And see, that's that balance, right? Is the balance is, what's the hotel chain? The Ritz-Carlton. You know, it's the one-page employee book of do whatever it takes to satisfy the customer, right? That's one end. Versus the other end is it's the 552-page, here's what you have to do at any given time. Now, going back to that question, if I have a 18-year-old which, I mean, don't get me wrong, we've had 14-year-olds who are some of the best instructors I've seen. Matt Smith, you and I both have had 14, 15, 16-year-olds who rivaled, one of the most exciting instructors I think I've ever seen, which is Mike Coles or Ernie Reyes, who rivaled them, as high school kids. But still, oftentimes they're not tuned into, here's 4 chunks I need to do. I need to make sure I get to this character development thing. I need to make sure I get to this. I need to make sure I get to this. So they need an outline of 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. You know what I'm saying? Because otherwise, inexperienced instructors will end up, they do the same thing for 45 minutes and everybody gets bored. Or they spend 3 minutes on something and then shift while everybody's still completely, totally confused and leave the class frustrated. So you've got to define for, especially less experienced instructors, a clear outline of what the shifts are. The substitute for that, from a standpoint of give them the clipboard, here's what you're doing, and so forth, is the experienced TED instructor who is either, doing it themselves. I mean, in the schools, by the way, I always had, this seems like a tangent, but everywhere you looked in the school, you would see a clock. Like in my office, I still have the habit of, you can't look at any angle in my office when I'm on video or off video without seeing one of those satellite clocks, right? And I'm always wearing a watch. Well, why is that? Because I'm so attuned to 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, time blocking, all of that stuff. When you're in a school, what when you're doing the sales process is, this class is over at 7 o'clock. I have 3 enrollments to do and 2 people need to be renewal prepped. And oh my God, it's 6:32 already, and I'm ready. See, you've got to be in that mode. Instructors have to be in that mode too, right? I've been on this for a certain amount of time. It's getting stale. Let's shift. So, but what I'm saying is, sometimes the owner operator can accomplish that role themselves, which is, I just kind of wander out and, and remind the instructor to, shift to something. And, we all develop those kind of hand signals. Mine was always, off to the next thing. But sometimes it's somebody who's, on top of the class management and has a good sense, an intuitive sense. And sometimes it's, let's open page, to page 7, and here's what we're going to do today, and put it on a clipboard. And I'll give you another, for instance, is years ago when we were developing all the character development curriculum, Master Smith remembers that, Junri and Master Smith and the rest of that staff did an awful lot of work back then. But mostly, tell you the truth, it was Junri was the evangelist for the content. There were a couple of things implemented in curriculum, like you had to be a B student to get a black belt and so forth. But mostly it wasn't ingrained down at the classroom level, right? And Steve LaValle and myself both went to Waco, Texas, and did a bunch of courses with Success Motivation Institute, or LMI, Leadership Motivation Institute. And one of them they had was Making of a Champion. And we both took that material, and I think I had implemented this quite a while before Steve, but at the same parallel time, I remember I had taken the Psychology of Winning book, which I think was published in 1984, and almost, and before that it was the audio cassette program, and basically turned that into, here's 10 lessons, positive, self-esteem, positive self-direction, positive self-dimension, all those, and just made it a lesson each week, and just kind of rotated that and then added to it. But the difference in implementation was this, is when I'd go up to Syracuse and sit in on Steve's staff meetings, what he would do is every Sunday, he would sit out by his pool in Syracuse, and he would write out a paragraph or two of what we're doing on character development stuff. Then they'd do a staff meeting on Monday morning, and they would all write it on a big poster board, and then the poster board would go on an A-frame, And the instructor starting class 1 of the week would read that. So they'd have the little huddle and the instructor would read it. And then, by the 5th or 8th or 10th class, he kind of had it memorized. But literally, class at 4 o'clock on Monday, he's going, let's work on our character development lesson this week by Kiyoshi Lavalley. And then he'd read it off, right? And my version of that was, here's the theme for the week. And every one of our instructors and black belts were so crammed with Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy, Dennis Waitley, Tony Robbins, go through the list, and especially go through the list of the ones from the 80s for this example. They were so crammed through with that, you could say, Julie, hit goal setting. And she could rattle off a 10-minute dissertation flawlessly, as well as Ziegler could do extemporaneously. So my version of it was everybody walking and talking on the floor was a walking, talking, living example of the product. And they were given an outline of what to talk about, but they weren't given specifics. Now, a horror story example of that was, I remember I'm talking to Tim Kovar one time, and they had kind of gone with my version of it, but they had done a crappy job on indoctrinating their staff. And indoctrination is the right word, socializing or indoctrinating. And what they ended up with is some high school kid standing up there doing the little lesson, talking about when he had used, to a kid's class, talking about when he had used drugs and why that was a bad idea and why, and he was using all this personal, heartfelt example that was totally, one, inappropriate for kids that age, and two, is it certainly didn't set him up on a pedestal as a walking, talking example, right? And so you've got to have the culture so ingrained that type of stuff never happens. Does that make sense? And you can make an argument for either approach. I could make an argument for Lavalley's approach because it's more on the Disney line of everybody's parodying exactly the same thing at the same time. My argument would be part of the problems that happened in his organization is his staff were not a walking, talking paragon of what we were talking about. There was an incredible hypocrisy. And given that was the case, he would have been better off to fully socialize them in the right way of thinking. Of course, the problem, fish stinks from the head. So the problem, started with underlying some of his issues. But he would have been better off to fully indoctrinate all of his staff, in my opinion, and get rid of the ones that didn't exemplify, walk, talk, act the part, right? Than to try to have people who underlying it was incongruent, parroting a corporate line. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay, but see, that's the spectrum. So you can do one spectrum is you try to predefine everything that comes out of their mouth, which, unless you have it there for them to read, and you make sure that they actually read it, is more difficult to enforce. The other end of it is they're massively overtrained. So when they are working through it on their own, they're fine. So, Matt Smith, let's shift to big picture on this stuff, and then work our way through and answer questions as we go. But Sebastian, did that nail it down for you? I know it was a maybe this, maybe that answer, but
No, yes, sir. Thank you. That clarifies a lot. I'm in the right page so far. It's just some minor tweaks, just what we double checking. Thanks.
The hardest part is transition. Hell, I remember when I can't believe I remember this, but when we implemented the psychology of winning, I had instructors who I'm here to teach karate. I can't be teaching people about goal setting. I had a number of instructors. I remember one specifically, Jeff, you remember that, he moved out from Washington, Kemp, who he just couldn't and wouldn't. He ended up quitting and working as a driver for Domino's because the idea of him sitting there and teaching people, success skills was just beyond his scope of self-image. It was interesting. But let's go back to structure. At what point do each of you have something implemented right now? Gustavo, I know you've been grappling with implementing right now. Ron, how's your curriculum look right now?
Great. We use a rotating curriculum.
Okay. Are you having any challenges with it?
No, not at all.
And are you using Greg Silva's old rotating curriculum, the Kempo derived?
No, Premier has our own. It's a mixture of Krav and karate and sing. And we
Okay.
have the personal development side as well. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Paul, how about within your schools?
I feel like I'm pretty tight. I really, it's not really an issue. Been doing the my brand of Kempo / Jiu-Jitsu for forever. But we have a written curriculum handbook. There's certain prerequisite classes for each rank. You have to accomplish X, Y, and Z, all the way up to 3rd degree black belt right now. So
Right.
we're
Right.
no
Okay.
questions with it. Yeah, all good.
Okay. Well,
And there might, Master Oliver, there might have been a little bit of a mix-up. I think there was an accidental text that went out that was a repeat from yesterday. So obviously today, guys, we're covering rotating curriculum.
yeah.
Okay.
Hey,
so-
sir, just to make sure, so far I've got this right. So what I'm doing is taking my curriculum, divided it into 3 weeks, right? And I'm starting with the top curriculum in each group.
Into 3 weeks.
Yeah, so I'm starting off with, if it's an intermediate class, the highest belt, I'm taking that curriculum, dividing it by 3, teaching it over 3 weeks, repeating the cycle one more time, testing them 2 weeks out from graduation.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Let's start at the top, Gustavo. Right?
Yeah.
Is-
Yeah, I think we started off with another part of the rotating curriculum once you have it established, rather than have it established.
Well, yeah, but let's start with big picture. You know, for you guys' purposes, but also for purpose of anybody else who needs to implement this on the watching the recording, is that Gustavo, I would argue this: there is no quote unquote right way to do this, but there are principles that are important, right?
Okay.
So take 2 extremes. When I looked at when I developed rotating curriculum originally, it was by looking at our black belts and looking at a problem that we had across the locations of one, not necessarily having head instructors and staff in each location that were really at the level of teaching a 4th degree black belt or a 3rd degree black belt or 2nd degree black belt new material, right? And number 2, it was about having, and we had a lot of black belts, but it was having too many people doing too many different things, and once they got to black belt, it sort of became a one-room schoolhouse, right? So I started there trying to solve a very specific problem and said, how do I solve this problem? And ended up with, and we had, as Paul was talking about the manual and everything, I had this extensive 40-page manual. Here's the curriculum at this level, and implemented the white stripe belt and the gold stripe, green stripe, and all that kind of stuff. And all of those implementation steps were helpful, but it didn't solve that core problem, right? That, you got a black belt class, and you've got, and black belt, of course, stretching out over 5 years. Couple 3 years to 2nd degree, couple 3 years to 3rd degree. So let's say first to 3rd degree, and then you have the ones that advance from there. But trying to solve that problem. And so what I started with is, here's 1st to 3rd degree curriculum. We're going to divide it out, and we're just going to make the whole thing in rotation. And at the time, it was a 4-month chunk. So we're going to do 3 progress checks a year. We had a major test, and then an intermediate progress check. And that changed over the years, where it went from a 4-month chunk to a 3-month chunk to a 2-month chunk. So eventually we ended up with, which was, I think, Master Smith's implementation, was kind of every other month there's a progress check under belts, and every other month there's a progress check for the black belts. But taking that piece, so let's say 5 years worth of curriculum, and just rotating the entire 5 years through people, right? So, and they were learning Eskrima and bow staff and kamas and, chucks and advanced taekwondo, if you can call them that, but, black belt ITF taekwondo forms and, musical forms and, a variety of other things, right? But it just, plus, the primary style is kind of Americanized kickboxing. So they were learning a variety of those things rotating, right? And then when, I saw Bill Clark, Master Clark doing this, is he was doing none of this for his black belts, but he was doing it for his underbelts. And his frame of it was, well, I used to teach this big college program like Master Smith did. And he goes, the college program was so much easier because you go in at the start of the semester, everyone knows nothing. And so you have them all moving together, and then the ones that continue on in the second semester, now you have a semester full of gold belts who just got their gold belt, and you have a semester full of new white belts who just started, and everybody's learning the same thing. You can have 60 people in the gym, and they're all learning the same thing, where the martial arts school wasn't like that. So, his frame of it is I looked at that and said, how can I make the martial arts school as easy to teach as the college program, right? And for a while years ago, so you might remember this, Nick Okinas was trying to preach, and right in concept, almost impossible in implementation, was let's just figure out how to enroll everybody every August like the school year, and then keep them all together. And that was given that he had never run a martial arts school and never really understood martial arts curriculum, although he had a dance school background, is that was kind of his first frame on how to solve that problem, right? And so when I looked at what Clark was doing, with ATA, is they were doing a basic class. You couldn't move into the next class until you're renewed. And then everyone who was in the class to renewed were in the same class until they got to black belt. And it was, now they were doing a shorter time to black belt than we normally would be. Matt Smith, what was it, typically a 2-year black belt? Is that right? You're muted.
3.
3? Were they doing a 3-year black belt? Okay. But basically, he would take that 3-year curriculum and have it all be the same. And so you didn't move into have it all be the same class. So you didn't move into that class until you're renewed. And then there was that curriculum. And then he would subset the class by these people in the black belt program, those people in the leadership program. And there was brilliantly a very fine differentiation what different levels of people could do. If you're in the leadership program, you get to go use those cool, kicking dummies on the wall over there. And if you're in black belt, you get to use the little hand targets or, stuff like that, right? But it was 3 years or whatever long you took to get to black belt of everything rotated over 3 years. And I think he was doing a 2-month cycle, 2 or 3 month cycle. But so it was 2-month cycles, but everybody in that class was on the same rotation. The advantage to that is that it makes scheduling a lot easier, because what Master Smith and I do is you have basically a beginner, intermediate, advanced group of people who are renewed. To me, the disadvantage is when I looked at our curriculum, and I was informed by, as Master Smith remembers, there was a period of time when we were teaching in Washington, D.C., that Junri said, we're not going to teach any of the traditional Korean forms. And in fact, part of the logic was Chae Hung Hai is a communist, and we don't want to do that anymore. But we're not going to teach any of the traditional Korean forms. But the first thing we were going to teach is Exodus, the musical form to Exodus. And I remember trying to teach Exodus to people who had never done any traditional forms ever before. And you remember that, Master Smith, it was rather a disaster, right? And you were, it wasn't me or anybody else, you were instrumental in explaining to him that didn't work so well. And going back to, and then he ended up creating his own, lower belt musical forms that were predecessors. But to me, it was kind of like, you never taught a kid to read, and now they're trying to read Shakespeare, right? I mean, people who've read a lot have a hard time understanding Shakespeare. And, you know, Exodus, as simple a form as it is hard to do right and hard to make look good. Right, isn't it, Matt Smith? Especially when you're taking that or Beethoven and trying to get 100 people to do it out in the sun for a performance. So if that, I was informed by that. And so when I looked at what Clark was doing underbelt, I said, well, yeah, but I've done that before, where somebody who's been at it for 4 months, I'm trying to teach them something that's way too complicated. So I said, let's take the curriculum, and instead of doing what he's doing, let's chunk it up into 3 pieces. And then we have, and I look at it from an academic sense of, here's the prerequisite to this, and here's the prerequisite to this. And that way, anything you have to know in order to accomplish the next level curriculum, we're going to do in the first year. And then anything, you know, to build upon it goes in the second year, goes in the third year. And in retrospect, the only thing that I regret having done is I made it 4 block, because we went from 3 months to 2 months at the same time. I went from 4 block, what I'm trying to say is I ended up with 4 blocks that were 8 months. And in retrospect, I would have made it a year curriculum, and then a year curriculum, then a year curriculum, rather than 4 months of curriculum, right? And if that was going to be in 2-month blocks, it could have been 6 belt levels together rather than 4 belt levels together. Does that make sense, Gustavo? So I'm saying all of this because, you know, looking at the level of difficulty of your curriculum, so a kickboxing curriculum or a Krav Maga curriculum lends itself, you know, from a standpoint of complexity to teach, to an easier time making a longer rotation. And something like a Kempo curriculum where you're going to teach them, you know, all the long 1, long 2, all of the you know, traditional Ed Parker lineage forms. You know, those are way more complicated, and you certainly wouldn't want to be teaching them the brown belt forms, having never learned what, you know, were the white or gold belt forms historically, right? So how you chunk it, I think, depends upon how complicated your curriculum is, and the more you chunk it down, the more you complicate scheduling, but then the easier you make the class to teach. Is that all making sense? Matt Smith, anything to add to that? You're muted again.
You know, I'll tell you, I didn't understand this whole, you know, rotating curriculum thing, and you know, at your insistence and Joe Corley and Bill Clark, did I finally do it? But
I beat you to death for 3 years.
well, and I tell you, I understand where Gustavo's coming from on how confusing this can be. I tell you, I think what confused me was you kept explaining it to me, and then you say, doesn't that make sense? And then I'd go, yeah, but in reality it didn't. But what finally clarified for me is when I think you put it down on paper and you actually showed how it's scripted out. And then all you had to do was lay your curriculum for your basic, you know, what you call trial, you know, class, your 1 year, first year curriculum in the basic trial class, and block that out. And then you go to level 1, which is beginner black belt training. And then you block that out. And then you went to level 2, intermediate black belt, and you blocked that. In other words, all you had to do was take those 5 blocks, those 5 sections, basic or trial, and that's all the curriculum you're going to teach in there and what belts go in there. And then you go to level 1. And again, doing this with that, do you have your writing pad behind you, Master Oliver? Your easel?
No. No, I could go. I could go get it. I could go get it.
I think if we put that down, and then they would have a picture of it, and they could just snap that picture, and then all they got to do is basically fill in the blanks.
Or I could whiteboard it on the on the Zoom. I had my tools and remembered how to do that. I'm going to have to get good at doing that because it'd certainly be useful for stats.
Because Gustavo, when we say that there's 5 classes, you have your basic beginner class, your basic beginner, right? That's the, and let me take beginner out of it because that's what confuses people.
So that would be your black belt qualifying class.
Exactly. That's our basic, or what Master Oliver likes to call his trial class. And that's that first year that you're signing them up. And you have to decide how far can they go in that if they don't renew. So maybe that goes up to green belt or high green or whatever your ranking is, right?
Well, based on our
And-
belt system right now, it's blue.
Yeah. And then you go to level 1 black belt training. Well, in our base,
now, before you skip over that, we are talking about, and maybe I misunderstood what you said and Gustavo replied. You've got the, basic beginner where everybody new goes in,
Right.
and then they don't go out of that class until they're renewed.
Correct. I got
And
that part.
right, and that can be, in our case, we do the first 2 belts, white belt, gold belt. It could be 6 months. It could be 2 months. The argument for moving them out quicker is I want them renewed at white belt, and I want them to be what I called, or with our staff, out of cycle, by the time they get their orange belt. So the expectation was we want to kind of force the idea of pushing them out of that class by getting them renewed. But it's however long you feel, one, they need to master basics before moving into more advanced curriculum that's going to rotate. And number 2, however quickly you can get them out of that class by getting them renewed. In our case, they're going to be in there for 4 months if they're renewed or if they're not renewed. But then if they are not renewed, a 4-month curriculum is going to rotate through them 3 times, and they're going to learn the same thing 3 times and then drop out if they actually stay around for a year and never renew. Of course, we don't want any of them to do that. And in fact, most of them don't hang around for a year and then drop out. Most of them, if they don't renew, drop out in 6 or 7 months, maybe earlier. And I've never seen, I was worried for a while about the curriculum change pushing them out the door. But in practical terms, I've never seen that. I've seen the curriculum change forcing the staff to get better at renewing them, but never seen it, essentially forcing people out the door. But I didn't mean to interrupt, Master Smith.
yeah, but back to that basic class.
I'll
and
go
we're
get
gonna
that
call
paper
it-
pad, Master Smith.
Say it again.
I'll go get that paper pad.
Okay, good. Yeah. So that basic class, which is where all your new people come in, that basic trial class, they're going to stay there for basically a year if they don't renew. In a perfect world, they renew at white or gold belt. And when they get their orange, they go into level 1 black belt training. And level 1 black belt training is called beginner black belt training, level 1. So there is 5 different classes: basic, level 1 beginner black belt training, level 2 intermediate black belt training, level 3 advanced black belt training, and level 5, which is black belt. So you have 5 different classes. Now, even though we have 5 different classes, basic are always by themselves. Level 1 and level 2 can be together, or level 2 and 3 can be together, or level 3 and black belt can be together. Do you know what I mean by they could be together?
Right. You can mix them in case, it's not a busy day. You can combine the classes.
Exactly.
Like if
they
I know.
have 2 separate curriculums.
Right.
And half would be on one side and half would be on one, because those 5 classes are all your different curriculums. And what curriculum we teach in each one of those is based on what belts are in those. Well, we know that basic is white and gold. So that's the curriculum we're going to teach. We know level one is orange, green, and purple in our school. That's level one. Now, orange, green, and purple have low and high ranks too. So it's however many belts. I might not be able to put as many belts in level one because I have so many at each belt.
Right.
So level one, it's not unusual in most of my schools that level one is always by themselves. Level two, on some days, I'll put level 2 and 1 together, but only on those classes that I see are real small. So that's how I make it a bigger class, by teaching 2 classes in at the same time. You follow me?
Right.
And then same thing with level 3. Level 3 is usually never full by itself. Black belt is usually never full by itself. So I usually like to put level 3 and black belt together. So each one of those that I told you, you decide what belts are going to go in there. And then your curriculum that you teach is exactly the same thing that you taught before the rotating curriculum. It's just a matter of what belts are in there. So if my school, if it's orange, green, and purple, then in level 1, those are the 3 curriculums that I'm going to be teaching. And if I'm going to teach all 3 of those, it doesn't matter what order you learn it in. Some people in their mind think that a level, a orange belt can't learn a purple belt form or curriculum. Well, they can, they're just not going to be as good at it. But they don't have to be until they get to that last block of that level 1. Because level 1, if there's 3 belts, then there's 3 blocks. If there's 4 belts, there's 4 blocks. So each block has a belt. You follow me? And when Master Oliver gets the pad and writes it, it's even more clear. But
Master
if
Smith,
I have,
oh, go ahead. I think you're going where my question is.
so I have 4 belts in there. Well, if I'm starting my rotating curriculum, let's say July 1st, which one of these curriculums should I start with? I have to start with the one that nobody knows. The one that nobody knows, because I cannot start my new rotating curriculum until after a testing cycle. So my most advanced belt in that block is the only one. That one knows everything except that last block, right? So I'll start with that, and then I'll keep working backward, and then we'll get all of them.
Yeah.
Okay, and Master Oliver has his pad there now.
Yeah.
And what I was explaining, Master Oliver, was, your basic class, your level 1, your level 2, level 3, and black belt, and then what belts go in each one of those is kind of based on how many of that level 1 do you have. You don't want to put 100 students in level 1 class, and then you only have 50 in a level 2 and 25 in a level 3.
But see, then listening to your description is, if you decided that, to use our terminology, level 1 and level 2 were going to be the same class, then really the way to design it is to have a curriculum that rotates through all of those belts, rather than 2 rotations going on kind of simultaneously in class. Does that make sense? And again, Master Smith, you and I tend to be a little centric of, we've always had so many assistant instructors running around because of the leadership development program and assistant instructor training that you've done, that we have a lot of bodies on the floor always, and it's fine. But I would much rather you design it at the beginning with the idea that you don't have to have a bunch of people running around, that one person can teach the class just fine, right? So again, the argument of what you just said, Master Smith, is if you could have it be where I had a rotation for basic, I had a rotation for 12 months, then I had a rotation for 24 months, and then I had a rotation for black belts if you wanted. And that makes scheduling easier, right? Because basically I am doing beginner advanced rather than beginner intermediate advanced. And I can have more of each of those classes, so they have more flexibility. And frankly, it doesn't change the volume in each class that much because you still have the same number of people. But as we know, oftentimes you have like a baby bubble. If you have bad retention, you have big white belt classes and you have horrible small brown belt classes. If you have good retention, then you have, big classes going up all the way through. And you're always, if you have halfway decent retention, you should have huge black belt classes because, they're at white belt for 2 months and they're at black belt for the rest of their life, more or less, depending upon how you chunk up the black belt class. And again, not meaning to overcomplicate it, but then take what you just, where we started that, Gustavo, with how do I run a 2-month or a 3-month chunk? Well, what you said was basically teach them something for a month or 3 weeks, reteach it for 3 weeks, and then review it and test on it. My argument would be it depends upon what you're teaching in that chunk, right? If I'm teaching a form that has 52 moves, I'm more likely to teach, the first half of it, then teach the second half of it, and then put it all together, right? So like the more complicated form I was mentioning before, Exodus or, Might for Right or, whatever name you want to give it, that one naturally chunks up into 3 pieces. So we would teach the first quarter, and then we would teach the next third-ish, and then we would teach the last quarter. And, more or less it would chunk nicely into 3 pieces or nicely into 4 pieces because there was kind of a form and then some intermediate stuff and then more or less a repeat of the form and then some intermediate stuff. So you could chunk it up that way easily. So if I was teaching that one over 2 months, I would teach a third of it for a couple weeks. I'd teach another third of it for a couple weeks. I'd teach another. Does that make sense, Gustavo? So, on the other hand, if you're doing sparring drills, they may well work exactly the way you said. Is I may do this sparring drill and teach it all to them for a couple 3 weeks. Then I may go back through it for a couple 3 weeks, and then I may test them on it.
Yeah. So now, you brought up forms. One form though for everybody. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So if I've got 4 different belts in that class, and since I'm starting this fresh right now, my graduation's next week and the week after we start.
Yeah.
I've been prepping the guys for the intermediate class as of right now. Our belt would be purple 1, 2 in there, and they would go up to they would be starting with our 4th kata, which really doesn't matter which kata they start with,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because our system derives from Okinawan systems. The Japanese flipped katas around when they switched it over, so I'm not too concerned about that.
Well, and Gustavo, you've been around enough to be at the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Awful lot of martial arts people are, they're just convinced that the masters in 1950 were masters of teaching pedagogy and et cetera. And the reality was, it kind of evolved randomly, and Taekwondo Che Hung Ai stole it all from the Japanese. Shotokan, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So and the reason I'm on board with this is that I already foresee the problem. When we moved HQ, I moved it into a much smaller location. I went from 2,000 square feet to 2,000.
Right.
And my mat's about 1,600 square feet.
Yeah.
And before we had a bigger
Which is
mat.
good for that size. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I have a great architect. But whatchamacallit, so that's why we're on board with this, just getting everybody trained and getting them to follow directions, because kind of like I kind of have a thing like Sebastian where They're young and they're sometimes misinterpreting a little bit. And, and then it's like, I got to rule with an
Bastion's
iron
young
fist right now.
and misinterpreting. I think you meant his staff, but I
Yes.
just thought I'd, yeah.
We have another question, Master Oliver.
Yes.
Chris does.
Hey, Master Smith, maybe you can help me out with this question. So you were talking about, like, for example, in the level 1 class, we have 4 belts, so we have 4 blocks. Now, when we structure those blocks, should it be each block, you learn a block here, block here, block here, block here, or is the 4th one should be a review, because once they move, they go into another class?
That can't work, right?
Right, that's what I was thinking. So we're not doing that, but I just
No.
want to make sure.
If you start with the most advanced form, the other 3 haven't ever learned it. Even the most advanced in that class hadn't learned it. Because if they learned the most advanced in level 1, they would move into level 2, right?
Mhm.
So when I start the new cycle for my level 1, I'm going to start with the most advanced form, just like Gustavo was talking about. And then the next block in 2 months, I'll teach the 3rd most advanced. Then I'll teach the 2nd most advanced, and then I'll teach the most beginner. And then, in other words, if I start here and I learn every one of these by here, then I'm qualified to go into the next level. You understand?
Yes.
So everybody is doing the same form. Now, it could be in the beginner level 1, you only have 3 belts. You have to actually count how many people you have in each one of those belts so you don't overcrowd level 1. I can put less or more belts. It doesn't matter, because they're just going to become part of the rotation.
Right.
I don't like to put 8 belts in there because I feel that's too much to rotate through. That's why I did it 3 underbelt rotations plus that basic, they're not black belt training yet. So everything is either basic, 3 levels of black belt leadership rotations, beginner, intermediate, advanced black belt training. And then the last one is black belts. And the black belts have their own rotation, like Master Oliver was talking about, where they're doing 1st, 2nd, and 3rd degree rotation. So you don't have to teach each degree of a black belt different stuff.
So you're never doing are you at any point doing a cumulative test?
Yeah.
A what?
A cumulative.
Yeah.
Yes, when they go for their black belt.
Well,
So
I'll answer that differently. We were doing cumulative tests at each graduation to the next level. So if you were graduating from level 1 to level 2, a cumulative test, level 2 to level 3, a cumulative test, and of course, black belt, they're going all the way back to white belt curriculum. But see, again, that's a relatively easy thing to accomplish, because if I did module 1 January, February, and taught, module A, let's say, and then I graduate new people into the class, and now I'm teaching module B. So I've got people who know module A, people who've never done module A, and people who know module B. I can be drilling people on module B and having these guys renew the previous module side by side, right? I can do just like we would do in the old classes, but I only need one instructor. You guys, you're going to do one yo now. We're going to review one yo, and you guys are going to do Tangoon and go through it, all the way through. Go. We're going to do, you're doing Form A, you're doing Form B as a review. We'll do it by the count. Ready? 1, go. 2, punch. Right? I mean, so you can have people who have been in there, have learned 3 modules. Every class they can go through the previous modules, while the newest people in the class are just doing the current module, right? So, and again, look at what the testing can be. I've got a group that are supposed to know, and by the way, it's no different than what it was before, where there was gold, orange, green, purple belt curriculum. I have people at this level. I can do everybody testing right now does the last module we just did. Great. People testing for Orange Belt sit down. Then let's all do, module C. Of course, they all have a name, but module C. Great. You guys sit down. Let's do module D. You guys sit down. Let's do module A. You guys sit down. You see what I'm saying? So I can have them go back through everything that they've done before.
Yeah.
I was always trying to have an extremely comprehensive test before they tested into level 3, because I knew our biggest problem was we were starting to get students who were getting brown belt who had forgotten all the crap they had learned before, and then we were having to basically relearn them.
And Master Oliver, I solved that. I solved that years ago. And the way we did that, I didn't do that review at every cycle, because I knew then if they had to go back and review all those other belts and learn their block of material, they weren't as good at their material. See, I want them focused on just that one belt level, and I want them to be as good as they possibly can be. Now, when they get to high brown is the last cycle. That's the last cycle that they actually have to learn new material. Because once they get to novice black belt, now they review, and again, this is how I'm doing it at my school. I have them from novice black to what we call conditional black belt or novice black belt, same belt, testing into what we call our prep cycle. They do half of the curriculum to go into prep cycle. Then to go from prep cycle to first degree black belt, they do the second half of the curriculum. So they have 2 whole blocks, and they're 4 months each, where they're going back and reviewing all of those forms, but they don't have any new form to learn because they've already learned them up to high brown. You follow me on that? And then I found that produced the best quality black belt, because when they have to learn a new form, plus they have to review everything, then either their new form sucked or the review sucked. So I made sure that I got them learning all of their individual stuff. And then by taking that black belt test in 2 steps, one step is the first half of the curriculum. The next test is the second half of the curriculum. And again, it's 4 months on each one of those. And again, remember, one was conditional or novice. They learned the first half to go to prep cycle. Prep cycle is a white belt with a black stripe. The conditional.
And just so nobody gets confused, when you come out to a test, you're doing it completely differently than we're doing it in Colorado, Master Smith, by everything you just described.
Y'all had the other 2 flipped.
Well, no, we're going from what was high brown belt, and then they go into prep cycle before.
Exactly. I said I flipped them.
Yeah.
I have
Yep.
novice because I want them to get that black belt with a white stripe, because that was a big hurdle for them. They felt really down the home stretch. And then I took that away from them. So you can do it either way. That doesn't matter. But what I'm doing is reviewing the curriculum there, and they're only being tested on the first half at one, the second half at the other. And I found that brought the quality of the test up so much more, because all they were doing in those 2 4-month blocks was all review.
Yeah, but
Review half of it in the first block, review half in the second block, and now they're a first degree black belt.
Yeah, and we are getting a little off the subject.
And Master Smith, you have another appointment, sir, on the other meeting room.
Okay, I'll hop over there.
Yeah, I might have to let you in. Text me if you need me to help you in.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, see you guys.
Okay.
Maybe use that chart back there.
Yeah, for whatever we need it for. Anyway, questions so far? Is this all making sense?
Sir, just to make sure, on the graduation, because I got a little fuzzy on that part, and so I'm graduating them. I have 4 belts. They're all doing the same curriculum. are they all doing the whole curriculum, or am I chunking it out in like, let's say it's 8 techniques altogether,
Okay.
right? So,
Well, okay. Now this comes in handy, right?
okay,
So
please.
So if I have, well, get a pen that writes. So let's, geez. There, well, sort of. Okay, so let's say this is my whole curriculum, right? But I have this period of time with, and you know, I'm going to say it this way: Module D, Module C, Module B, Module A, right? And this is relative to what my rank specific curriculum was before, right? So this is the higher level, the intermediate, and the, you know, the lower level. Now, once you have it in rotation, this section looks like this. So it may be in going through there, one person learned C, well, it depends upon, yeah, C, B, A, D. Another person may learn B, A, D, C. Another person may learn A, D, C, B. Another person may learn D, C, B, A before they finish 12 months. Does that make sense so far? Right? And so now when I come to the test, I basically, what's the highest rank you were saying in a class?
I was just thinking of the intermediate, so that would be purple belt. So
Okay, so purple, what's below purple?
purple, green, blue, orange.
Blue, orange. It always psychs me out to have blue before green and purple, because we have blue up here and then red. Okay, so you have those 4, right? Now, after having, I don't know if you can see that or not, but
No, I can see it.
okay, so here I have a test right now, and I've got all 4 of those people testing right here, right?
Yes.
So I have the orange belts know 1 block of curriculum. The blue belts know 2 blocks of curriculum. The 3 green belts know 3 blocks of curriculum, and the purple belts know 4 blocks of curriculum.
Okay.
Right? So when I'm having the test, I can have the orange belts do what we just did, the last block.
Mm-hmm.
And see, I'm going backwards. So they can do the last block and sit down. The blue belts can do the next 2 blocks, sit down. The green belts can do the next 3 blocks, sit down. And then the purple belts can do the last 4 blocks and sit down. Right? And when I'm running class, I can certainly, let's say we're on curriculum C. I can run the whole class on curriculum C, right? But then I can go to the blue belts and say, blue, green, purple, you're going to do our last module, so curriculum D. So you're doing curriculum D as a review. Orange belt, you're doing curriculum C. And then I can do, okay, purple, green belts, you're doing curriculum A. Green belts, you're doing, or blue belts, you're doing D. And orange belts, you're doing C. And then I can say purple belts, you're doing B, right? So I can go through backwards. And again, what the difference is, I'm not teaching them anything new except for this last curriculum. And I'm not teaching them anything new except for this last curriculum. I'm not teaching them anything new except this last curriculum. And the orange belts, I'm only teaching them this last curriculum. So everybody is learning this curriculum for 2 months.
Right.
But they already know the previous 2 modules they've done, so I can always go progressively backwards, right? And that way, and that's why I figured out you had to do the highest level first and then move backwards, right?
Right. So this way the highest people don't get bored.
Yeah, you're moving them out of the class before they go back through and relearn something they already learned.
Right.
And it keeps them from feeling like they got demoted.
Exactly. And So, but, and then when I bring them up for graduation, the purple belts would be doing everything, and then subsequently less, yes?
Yeah, and in practical terms, I'd say most of the schools don't do a lot of review of the old stuff. You know, especially for the basics and the sparring drills and so forth, I think it's pretty important to keep them fresh on all the curriculum all the time. And the biggest problem that, you know, Master Smith was addressing, we're philosophically, we're a little different on that. But what he was addressing, and we do the same thing, is we still get brown belts who look like crap on stuff they learned 2 years ago. Now, hopefully they don't look like crap on doing a sidekick, because that's, you know, but they look like crap on the specific details of the stuff they did 3 years ago. And then I know our schools aren't doing a very good job of reviewing that material in class. They get stuck on just teaching them the new things and not doing review.
Okay.
Yeah.
That-
But see, the big deal is not to ever get yourself in the situation where you're forced to have 4 or 5 people on the floor in order for the class to run, right? And again, going to your background longevity, you know, LaValle had this very elegant, very complicated way of thinking about things. You know, your plate spinners, you have this, you know, you have this pod and this pod and this pod and this pod. It was complicated in hell, and without somebody who was, you know, truly a master of doing it, it fell apart quickly. So, you know, it looked good when you had somebody really do it well, and it was exciting and so forth. But for most schools, it was just way too complicated and really was not very useful.
Yeah, it could turn into a hot mess. And the way we did everything before, we always needed minimum of 2 instructors on the floor, sometimes more.
Yeah. This way, every class can run just fine with 1 instructor. Again, best analogy of Bill Clark, and everybody started on the same day and everybody knows, you know, the same curriculum and they're all doing the same thing. I think of it as, you know, the opening scene on the island and Enter the Dragon, and you have all the drunk extras, you know, doing the same thing at the same time. But that's what that's what turned out. They were all wearing wet uniforms because they hadn't dried overnight from sitting in the rain, and they were about half of them were drunk. But still, you know, it's an iconic scene.
So yeah, this makes it a lot easier to, yeah. Now, I do have a question, because obviously I'm gonna have to change my belt system.
What? Why?
I don't have enough belts.
Right. Well, again, and that's because of shortening the testing cycle.
Right. So if, you know, so do you still use the old GUP system? You know, starting at 10, going backwards to 1, or
No.
Not at all?
No, that went away a long time ago. But what you can do, keep in mind, is you can just insert intermediate ranks.
Right.
Right.
Gustavo,
So
we took it down a lot too.
say it again.
So we did a lot of work with that, and we added belts.
Yeah.
We added a bunch of belts, like 17 for a 4-year program. Look,
Yeah.
so look, we see how we have a gray between the yellow, and then we have like a green and a camouflage,
Right.
and a dark blue and a navy blue, and a junior brown and a whole brown, and then we got deputy belts before you get to black belt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
How many belts do you have total, sir?
17 to black belt, 4 years program, maybe 3-month period. No, 16, 15.
Yeah. So the way my instructor worked it out, he says it looks like we're going to need 18 belts.
Sounds about right.
Well, and again, there's all different ways.
Would it be okay to maybe go to a 4-month cycle at the like the last 2 brown belt levels? That kind of thing.
Oh, sure.
You know, like LinkedIn, as long as it's in denominations of 2 months. Yes.
Correct. Well,
So
well, there's, again, I hate to always make it complicated, but there's no magic in it's got to be 2 months. Other than, to me, in the first year, the shorter the cycle, the more they're continuing to be pulled through by the movement, right?
Right.
And a brown and black belt, the old way of doing it is you got your first degree black belt, you'll test again in 3 years. To me, that's completely a non-starter, right? That's go to college for 4 years and there'll be a test at the end. But there's no magic of whether it's 2 months, 3 months, or 4 months, especially as you get higher in the ranks.
Well, I'm just saying, like, complicated wise, it's just going to be easier to stay on a version of 2 months or 4 months like that.
Right.
I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. I'm driving the instructors nuts.
Sure. Yeah. You want to keep it as simple as possible, and adding belts can be as simple as, you have blue and then you have blue with a black stripe to the middle. You have green and you have green with a black stripe, or you have blue with a green stripe to the middle and you have green with a purple stripe to the middle. I mean, it doesn't have to get too complicated, right? You have the additional complication of making sure you can get the damn belts and, being able to order them on Thursday and get them by Monday for the, test, all that kind of stuff.
If I kept it at, is there any point where your cycle goes longer?
Yeah, I mean, we've tended to have it go longer at black belt. For a long time it was. We've always done a major test spring and fall. I mean, not
Right.
always, but for years.
Right.
And then so if it was 2 a year, we did an intermediate progress check in between them, which then translates to 3 months, 3
But
months.
they do 2 black.
That's fine, right? And for a while, we were actually doing it every 4 months. So there was a major test, and there was, one progress check. Any of those work fine. Generally, it's nice to get the black belts where they're doing something formally as frequently as possible. Otherwise, you end up with like the old days where, they train real hard a month before the progress check and, they're not so much
Right.
the rest of the time.
I've had, I've always wanted to do a progress check. I've not done well with it.
Yeah.
So we basically were running what I did was I started doing 3 major tests a year just to keep everybody. But once they got their done, they didn't see a test for years.
Right.
And then that was always backfiring because, the guys that trained, but the guys that
So then
a lot of people spazzed
we,
out on the testing.
what do we need to do? How do we need to do this?
We're gonna mute you. What happens then is you end up with too much black belt attrition.
Right. Well, this is a big clarification. I can work off of this now.
Yeah.
I'm almost there, now, but this kind of solidified everything I need to fix.
Yeah.
So I should be good to go, hopefully.
Yeah. Either one of you have any other questions on that? We can call it a day if you've got it for
I'm
now.
gonna say have fun, Gustavo.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Master Albert. It helps a lot.
Yeah,
Guys,
absolutely.
Anybody question? All right, we're good, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you,
All right,
guys.
sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Have a great day.
And we'll put
Thank
the
you.
recording up in the leadership member site.
Yeah. Bob, do you need anything from me?
No, sir.
Are you healthy yet?
I mean,